This is the story of how a Boston pool hall hustler rewrote sniper doctrine using geometry that West Point instructors had never considered. James Kelleher grew up in Charlestown, Massachusetts. His three-room tenement smelled like boiled cabbage and motor oil. His father worked grueling 16-hour shifts loading munitions at the Charlestown Navy Yard docks for depression wages. Jimmy spent his childhood in Murphy's Pool Hall on Main Street. While other kids played stickball, 12-year-old Jimmy was calculating deflection angles off cushions, sinking impossible combination shots that shouldn't work according to straight-line physics. The owner, Frank Murphy, noticed the kid could see trajectories nobody else saw. "You think in ricochets," Frank told him once. "Most people see the ball in the pocket. You see everything the ball could hit between here and there." Jimmy never finished high school, dropping out at 16 to work his father's shift when the old man's back gave out. By 1942, he was running a rigging crew, reading engineering blueprints for crane operations, calculating load-bearing angles for ship repairs. When Pearl Harbor happened, he enlisted the next morning. He was sent to Fort Benning for infantry training. The rifle range changed everything. Keller qualified expert marksman with scores that made the instructors check for cheating. What caught their attention wasn't his accuracy, but his unorthodox shooting positions. While other recruits fired from prone, kneeling, or standing, Keller would find strange angles, shooting around barriers, under obstacles, and off reflective surfaces. "Kid shoots like he's playing geometry instead of war," one sergeant noted in his file. "They made him a sniper." By March 1944, Keller was in Italy with the 36th Infantry Division. He had 19 confirmed kills. He followed standard doctrine: find elevated position, establish range, compensate for wind, squeeze trigger. Then came the Rapido River Valley. The Gustav Line fortifications were designed by men who understood that concrete and positioning beat firepower. Monte Cassino dominated the valley. German observers watched every American movement and called down artillery with surgical precision. One particular observation post, designated Strong Point 7, sat in a concrete bunker built into the mountainside 480 yards from American lines. The German spotter inside had a direct view of the valley floor. Whenever Allied forces attempted to advance, artillery shells arrived within 90 seconds. Standard sniper doctrine said, suppress the observer, but Strong Point 7 had been designed by someone who understood ballistics. The firing slit faced perpendicular to likely sniper positions. The walls were reinforced concrete, 3 feet thick. The slit was only 18 in wide and 8 in tall. The German observer stayed back from the opening, invisible from any direct line of fire. Allied snipers had tried for 3 weeks to suppress that position. Lieutenant Marcus Chen tried to shoot through the firing slit on March 1. The round sparked off concrete 6 in left of the opening. Chen died from return fire. Sergeant William Morrison tried suppressive fire on March 4. 3 of his 17 rounds entered the bunker, but none hit the observer. Morrison and 2 men died in the mortar barrage the German observer called down. Private First Class Eddie Donovan tried to advance under smoke cover to within grenade range on March 8. German machine gun fire cut through the smoke at knee height, and Donovan bled out in a crater. Keller watched Morrison die. Morrison had shown him photographs of his daughter, Sarah, saying, "I'm teaching Sarah to fish," taking her to Lake Texoma, spending a whole summer doing nothing. The next morning, Morrison was buried in a mass grave with 17 other men. The German observer remained operational. Keller studied the bunker for 6 days. The problem was not the bunker's strength. The problem was everyone was thinking in straight lines. Keller studied the bunker for 6 days, sketching diagrams on cigarette packages and calculating angles with a borrowed carpenter's protractor. The problem wasn't the bunker's strength. The problem was that everyone was thinking in straight lines. Direct fire, direct assault, direct suppression. The German engineers had designed defenses for direct threats, but Keller had grown up in a pool hall. On March 12, Keller approached Captain Raymond Hayes during morning briefing. "Sir, I need permission to attempt Strong Point 7. Hayes looked up from his coffee. "Keller, 3 snipers have tried, all dead. They tried direct fire." "Sir, I'm proposing indirect." Hayes stared. "Indirect fire is artillery's job, Corporal. Not indirect artillery." "Sir, indirect rifle fire through the beam gap." Keller pulled out his sketches. He explained that the bunker has a concrete roof supported by I-beams. German engineers offset the firing slit, but they had to leave structural gaps where the beams meet the walls. There's a 3-inch gap 18 inches above the firing slit. If I position at bearing 247, elevation advantage of 32 feet, I can fire through that gap. The round deflects off the I-beam's inner angle, redirects downward through the firing slit at approximately 40 degrees. Hayes studied the diagram. You want to bank a rifle round off a steel beam like a pool shot? Yes, sir. That's insane. It's court-martial territory. If you waste ammunition on trick shots while men are dying. Keller met his eyes. Men are dying because we keep trying the same straight-line doctrine. Morrison died because we don't think in angles. Chen died because we're predictable. Donovan died because we're out of ideas. Hayes was quiet for 30 seconds. Finally, Hayes said, "You get one shot, Corporal. One. If you miss, you're back on standard patrol. If you hit, we'll talk. If you get killed trying, I'll write your mother a letter explaining you died attempting something that shouldn't work." Understood, sir. Keller spent that night calculating. The beam gap was 3 inches wide, at 480 yards. That was a target window smaller than a quarter. The deflection angle off the I-beam's inner surface would redirect the round approximately 43 degrees downward if he hit the precise point where beam met wall. A round entering at 43 degrees downward would strike the German observer, who would be standing roughly 6 feet back from the firing slit, center mass. If everything worked perfectly, the M1903 Springfield was accurate to 800 yards under ideal conditions. But this wasn't ideal. This was attempting to thread a needle from 5 football fields away. Then bank that needle off steel at precisely the right angle to kill a man he couldn't see. March 14, 1944, 11:15 a.m. Keller moved into his position, a shattered farmhouse 480 yards from Strong Point 7. Exactly as calculated, the position gave him a 34-foot elevation advantage. He settled prone. The stone floor was cold against his chest. The smell of aviation fuel mixed with the sweet, rotten odor of old corpses. He settled the rifle stock against his shoulder. Through the scope, the bunker filled his vision. The firing slit was a dark rectangle. Above it, barely perceptible, was the beam gap, 3 inches of shadow where structural steel met the wall. He noticed the first problem. The I-beam had been installed with a slight upward angle on the left side. Perhaps 2 degrees. This would affect the deflection. He immediately adjusted his aim 6 inches to the right, compensating for the beam's angle. He couldn't see the German observer. This entire plan was theoretical. Morrison had died on certainties. Keller was betting lives on trigonometry calculated with a borrowed protractor. He chambered around. The bolt's metallic click seemed impossibly loud. One German stood in that bunker, waiting to call down death. The moral calculus was simple. If this worked, that German died. If it didn't, more Americans would die. Keller adjusted the scope. The wind had died to nothing, rare luck. Visibility was clear. He exhaled slowly. Keller exhaled slowly, at the bottom of his breath. In the moment between heartbeats, he squeezed the trigger. The M1903 kicked against his shoulder. The shot echoed across the valley. Flat and sharp, through the scope, Keller watched the round's vapor trail for a split second before it disappeared into the beam gap. Then silence. No secondary sound, no visible impact, no way to confirm whether the round had deflected as calculated or simply buried itself in concrete. The bunker sat silent across the valley. Strong Point 7 looked exactly as it had 30 seconds ago. Keller didn't move. Standard sniper doctrine. Remained still for 60 seconds after firing. Movement attracted return fire. He kept his eye to the scope, watching for any change. 20 seconds, 30 seconds. A bird landed on the bunker's roof, pecked at something, then flew away. Then, at 47 seconds, the bunker's rear door opened. A German soldier emerged, walking quickly, but not running. He moved around to the firing slit's exterior, disappeared, and then reappeared, backing out of the bunker. He began waving frantically toward the rear position. 3 more Germans emerged, running now. 1 disappeared inside. The others began shouting. Keller couldn't hear the words, but he could read the body language: panic, confusion, the universal choreography of soldiers discovering their observer was dead. The round had worked. Keller watched German activity for 8 more minutes. They evacuated the position completely. No replacement observer entered. By 1:15 p.m., Strong Point 7 sat abandoned. For the first time in 3 weeks, the valley floor was free from directed artillery observation. Captain Hayes found Keller 20 minutes later. Did you take that shot? The Germans abandoned Strong 7. Infantry patrol is moving up now to verify. Yes, sir. Hayes studied him. How sure are you that you hit? 90%, sir. Maybe 95. Jesus. Hayes pulled out a cigarette. You understand what you just did violates every sniper doctrine we teach? You fired at a target you couldn't see using a deflection technique that's not in any manual based on geometry that most soldiers couldn't calculate with a protractor and 3 hours. Yes, sir. Hayes took a long drag. Patrol confirmed it. German observer is dead. Single gunshot wound. Downward trajectory. Entry through upper chest. Exit through lower abdomen. Exactly like you described. They're calling it impossible. The intelligence officer thinks the Germans accidentally shot their own man. Hayes flicked ash. I'm not writing this up. Corporal, if I document what you just did, some general is going to order every sniper in Italy to start attempting trick shots. 99% of them will fail. Good men will die trying to replicate something that shouldn't work. Understood, sir. But Hayes met his eyes. If someone asks you how you did it, you tell them. If another sniper wants to learn, you teach them quietly off the record. We need this capability. We just can't make it official. Hayes crushed his cigarette. Morrison, would have liked to see this. He always said, you thought different than the rest of us. For what it's worth, Corporal, you just saved lives. Probably dozens, maybe hundreds. Nobody's going to pin a medal on you for it. But you did right. After Hayes left, Keller sat alone. The adrenaline wore off, leaving behind exhaustion and the hollow recognition that he'd just proven everything the army taught about direct fire was incomplete. Morrison, Chen, and Donovan were still dead, but maybe the next observer position wouldn't cost 3 lives to neutralize. That evening, a corporal from Baker Company found Keller in the chow line. Heard you took out Strong Point 7. How'd you do it? Keller hesitated, then explained the geometry. You know that bunkers got I-beams supporting the roof? There's a gap where the beam meets the wall 3 in. You hit that gap at the right angle. Round deflects off the beam's inner surface. Redirects downward into the bunker. Same principle as banking a pool shot off the rail. The corporal stared. That's insane. That's physics. The corporal was quiet. Could you teach someone to do that if they can do math and they understand angles? Baker Company's got 3 snipers. We've been trying to crack Strong Point 12 for a week. Keller looked at him. You got a protractor? Meet me after chow. Bring your rifle and something to write on. By morning, 4 snipers knew Kelleher's beam gap technique. It spread through the enlisted ranks not as indirect fire, but as the gap shot, or Keller's angle, or simply the trick. On March 16, 1944, Baker Company's Sergeant Thomas Riley attempted Strong Point 12, a German observation bunker with an offset firing slit and reinforced concrete. Identical in construction to Strong Point 7, Riley had spent 2 hours with Keller the night before, learning to identify structural gaps, calculate deflection angles, and adjust for beam positioning. Riley took his shot at 2:47 p.m. from 510 yards. The round entered the beam gap, deflected off an I-beam, and struck the German observer in the head. Strong Point 12 went silent. Baker Company advanced 400 yards that afternoon without taking artillery fire. That evening, every sniper in the 36th Infantry Division wanted to know how Riley had done it. The technique spread without documentation, no official reports, and no training memoranda. It was simply whispered knowledge in foxholes, crude diagrams sketched in dirt, and snipers teaching snipers the geometry their instructors had never considered. By March 20, 15 snipers were attempting beam gap shots. 8 had succeeded. The German 1st Fallschirmjäger Division noticed first. A recovered intelligence report dated March 22, 1944, stated, American snipers demonstrating unprecedented capability against fortified observation positions. 3 bunkers were neutralized in 5 days through a method, not yet determined, resulting in the loss of 3 observers and 2 forward artillery coordinators. German combat engineers inspected abandoned bunkers and found bullet impacts in unexpected locations. They discovered rounds embedded in I-beams, calculated trajectories, and realized what the Americans were doing. Understanding the technique didn't make it easier to defend against. as the beam gaps were structural necessities. German doctrine immediately adjusted. Observation posts received orders to position observers further back from firing slits, increasing the distance to 12 feet instead of 6. This reduced their visibility of the battlefield, made artillery coordination less precise, and slowed response times. The psychological impact was enormous. Oberleutnant Friedrich Hartmann, a decorated German sniper, reported that an American round had entered through a structural gap he had deemed non-threatening, striking his observer and necessitating immediate withdrawal. He concluded, "This represents fundamental evolution in American sniper capability." By April 1, 1944, German forward positions were receiving artillery support 20% slower than before March 14. American advances met less accurate fire. Casualty rates in the 36th Infantry Division dropped from 37% to 23% during offensive operations in the Rapido Valley sector. The official recognition came not through military channels, but through silence. In late April, a colonel from Army Intelligence filed a classified assessment that noted significant improvement in counter-observation capabilities, but attributed this to enhanced sniper training and improved intelligence on enemy fortification patterns. Keller's name appeared nowhere in the report. By May 1944, the technique had spread to the British 8th Army, when a British sniper used the beam gap deflection near Monte Cassino. His commanding officer asked how he'd learned it. The sniper said, "Yank Corporal showed me at a supply depot." Didn't catch his name. The technique spread to France after D-Day, used against German pillboxes built into the bocage hedge. Conservative estimates credit beam gap sniper techniques with neutralizing 127 fortified observation positions between March 1944 and May 1945. Each position represented approximately 3 American lives saved, 381 lives saved by geometry that Army instructors had never taught. In June 1944, the Army War College received an anonymous technical paper detailing the beam gap techniques. 7 months later, in January 1945, the Army finally authorized a training program. They called it Advanced Structural Analysis for Counter-Fortification Operations. Instructors taught the same techniques Keller had developed in a pool hall. The official curriculum provided no attribution. Keller received no commendation or official recognition. He didn't care. Morrison, Chen, and Donovan were still dead, but the 381 lives saved had names, families, and futures. That was sufficient. James Keller survived the war. Returning to Charlestown in November 1945, he found work as a crane operator at the Navy Yard, calculating load weights and stress angles. He taught his children to play pool, showing them how to calculate angles, explaining that straight lines were just one option. Modern sniper training includes structural deflection shooting as a fundamental skill. The curriculum acknowledges the technique originated during World War II, but provides no attribution to specific individuals. Keller died in 1998, aged 77. His obituary was silent on strong point 7, the beam gap deflection, and the 381 lives his geometry had saved. The innovation that revolutionized sniper doctrine originated with a Boston dock worker who learned to think in angles while playing pool for quarters. That's how innovation actually happens in war, through men who risk court-martial to attempt something that shouldn't be possible. Through men who understand that sometimes the difference between death and survival is 3 inches of shadow.